Mrs. Johnson was a woman who was known for her pride and wicked ways. She was a single mother who had raised two daughters, Emily and Sarah, on her own. Emily was a kind and gentle soul. She was always looking out for others and trying to help those in need. She was a hard worker and always tried her best in everything she did. Sarah, on the other hand, was a spoiled and selfish girl. She was always thinking of herself and what she wanted, without caring about how her actions might affect others. She was lazy and didn't like to work hard, always expecting others to do things for her. Mrs. Johnson loved Sarah more than Emily, because Sarah was more like her. She was proud of Sarah's spoiled and selfish ways, and encouraged her to be even more selfish and lazy. As the girls grew older, their differences became more and more apparent. Emily worked hard and got good grades, while Sarah barely passed her classes and expected everyone to do things for her. Despite their differences, Emily always tried to help Sarah and be kind to her. But Sarah just took advantage of Emily's kindness and used her for her own gain. As time went on, Mrs. Johnson's behavior towards Emily became increasingly cruel. She would constantly criticize Emily, telling her that she was worthless and that she would never amount to anything. Meanwhile, Mrs. Johnson pampered Sarah, giving her everything she wanted and telling her that she was the most beautiful and intelligent person in the world. Emily tried to ignore her mother's cruel words, but it was hard. She began to doubt herself and wonder if she was indeed worthless. Sarah, on the other hand, lapped up her mother's praise and attention. She became more and more spoiled, expecting everyone to cater to her every whim. One day, Mrs. Johnson sat Sarah down and gave her some advice. "Sarah, you're a beautiful girl, and you deserve to have the best things in life," she said. "Don't waste your time with poor men who can't provide for you. Go after rich men, men who can give you the life you deserve." Sarah listened intently, her eyes shining with excitement. She had always known that she was meant for great things, and now her mother was telling her that she deserved to have the best. Emily, who was sitting in the next room, overheard the conversation. She felt a surge of anger and resentment towards her mother. Why was she always so cruel to her, and yet so kind to Sarah? As the days went by, Emily noticed that Sarah was becoming more and more ruthless in her pursuit of rich men. She would flirt shamelessly with them, using her beauty and charm to get what she wanted. Emily was disgusted by Sarah's behavior, but she knew that she couldn't change her sister. All she could do was try to stay out of Sarah's way and focus on her own life. But as time went on, Emily began to realize that her mother's influence was not just limited to Sarah. Mrs. Johnson's cruel words and actions were also affecting Emily, making her doubt herself and her own worth. Emily knew that she had to get away from her mother's toxic influence if she wanted to survive. She began to make plans to leave home, to start a new life where she could be free from her mother's cruelty. But as she was making her plans, Emily couldn't help but wonder what would happen to Sarah. Would she ever realize the harm that their mother's influence was causing her? Or would she continue down the path of ruthlessness and greed, never knowing the damage she was causing to herself and those around her? As Sarah continued to pursue rich men, she began to develop a habit of insulting and belittling gentle men who came her way. She would mock their clothes, their cars, and their jobs, making them feel small and insignificant. Her mother, Mrs. Johnson, supported Sarah's behavior, telling her that she was just being selective and that she deserved only the best. But Emily was horrified by Sarah's behavior. She knew that her sister was being cruel and hurtful, and she wanted to help her see the error of her ways. One day, Emily approached Sarah and tried to give her some advice. "Sarah, I know you think you're being clever and sophisticated, but the way you're treating these men is really hurtful," Emily said. "You're not just hurting them, you're also hurting yourself. You're missing out on the chance to meet some really great guys." But Sarah just laughed at Emily's advice. "You're just jealous because you're stuck with that poor boyfriend of yours," Sarah sneered. You'll never know what it's like to date a rich and successful man. Emily's boyfriend, Jack, was a kind and hardworking man who loved Emily with all his heart. He didn't have a lot of money, but he made up for it with his kindness and generosity. Emily was furious at Sarah's insult. "How dare you?" Emily exclaimed. "Jack is a wonderful person, and he's worth more than all the rich men you've ever dated." Sarah just rolled her eyes. "Whatever, Emily," she said. "You're just stuck in your own little world. I'm going to go out there and get what I want." And with that, Sarah stormed off, leaving Emily feeling angry and hurt, but Emily knew that she couldn't let Sarah's behavior get to her. She had to rise above it and be the better person, so Emily took a deep breath and let it go. She knew that Sarah would eventually realize the harm she was causing, and she would be there to support her when she did. Emily complained her mother and sister's attitude towards her to Jack, but Jack, being a kind person, pet and encouraged her to be strong. "My love, please, you have to be strong. All of this is a matter of time. I believe one day they will realize their mistakes and take corrections. I promise to be always there for you." Emily smiles and they hug each other. As time went on, Sarah and her mother, Mrs. Johnson, became notorious for their cruel and dismissive behavior towards any man who dared to express interest in Sarah. Suitors would come from all over, hoping to win Sarah's hand, but they would be met with scorn and ridicule by Sarah and her mother. "You're not handsome enough," Sarah would say, or "you're not rich enough." The suitors would leave, feeling humiliated and rejected. But Sarah and her mother didn't care. They were convinced that they were superior to everyone else, and that they deserved only the best. One day, a kind and gentle man named Michael came to visit Sarah. He was a hard-working engineer, with a good heart and a genuine interest in getting to know Sarah. But Sarah and her mother were not impressed. "You're not handsome enough," Sarah said, rolling her eyes. "And you don't make enough money," Mrs. Johnson chimed in. "Yes, we're looking for someone with a lot more to offer. Someone who can provide for Sarah in the style she deserves." Michael was taken aback by their cruel words. He had never been treated so poorly before, and he didn't know how to respond, but then he looked at Sarah, and he saw the emptiness in her eyes. He saw the way she was being manipulated by her mother, and he felt sorry for her. "Sarah, I think you're making a big mistake," Michael said, gently. "You're letting your mother's superficial values dictate your choices. But what about what you really want? What about what will make you truly happy?" Sarah was taken aback by Michael's words. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever challenged her mother's values and encouraged her to think for herself. For a moment, Sarah felt a glimmer of doubt. She wondered if she was indeed making a mistake by letting her mother dictate her choices, but then her mother's voice cut in. "Sarah, don't listen to him. He's just a loser, trying to get your attention," and Sarah's doubts were extinguished. She turned back to Michael, her eyes cold and hard. "I'm not interested," she said, dismissively, and with that, Michael left, feeling sad and disappointed. He knew that he had been rejected, not just by Sarah, but by her mother's toxic values as well. One day, as Sarah was walking along the beach, she saw a handsome and wealthy-looking man standing by the water's edge. He was dressed in a tailored suit and wore a confident smile on his face. Sarah was immediately drawn to him and felt a strong attraction. She walked up to him and introduced herself. "Hello, I'm Sarah," she said, trying to sound casual. The man turned to her and smiled. "I'm Aquarius," he said, his voice deep and smooth. Sarah was taken aback by his name, but she didn't think much of it. She was too busy admiring his handsome face and chiseled physique. As they talked, Sarah found herself falling deeper and deeper in love with Aquarius. He was charming, intelligent, and kind, everything she had ever wanted in a man. But what Sarah didn't know was that Aquarius was actually a water god, sent to Earth to punish her for her cruel and selfish ways. Aquarius had been watching Sarah from afar, and he was appalled by her behavior. He decided to come to Earth and teach her a lesson, but as he got to know her, he found himself falling in love with her. Despite his initial intentions, Aquarius found himself wanting to help Sarah change her ways and become a better person. He decided to stay on Earth and see if he could make a difference in her life. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah and Aquarius grew closer and closer. They spent all their time together. And Sarah found herself feeling happier than she had ever felt before. But despite her happiness, Sarah's mother was not pleased with her relationship with Aquarius. She didn't like the fact that Aquarius was a mysterious and powerful man, and she was worried that he would hurt Sarah. "Sarah, I don't trust him," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice full of concern. "He's too perfect, too charming. There's something not right about him." But Sarah wouldn't listen. She was too in love with Aquarius to care about her mother's warnings. "I know what I'm doing, Mother," Sarah said, her voice firm. "I'm happy with Aquarius, and that's all that matters." And with that, Sarah and Aquarius continued their relationship, despite Mrs. Johnson's disapproval. But little did they know, their love was about to be tested in ways. As the days went by, Aquarius began to work his magic on Mrs. Johnson. He used his powers to make her see him in a different light, to make her love and accept him. At first, Mrs. Johnson was resistant to Aquarius's charms. She had always been a stubborn and proud woman, and she didn't want to admit that she was wrong about Aquarius, but Aquarius was patient and persistent. He kept showing up at Mrs. Johnson's doorstep, bearing gifts and smiling charmingly. He helped her with her household chores and ran errands for her. Slowly but surely, Mrs. Johnson began to soften. She found herself looking forward to Aquarius's visits, and she even started to enjoy his company. As the weeks turned into months, Mrs. Johnson's transformation was complete. She had gone from being Aquarius's biggest critic to being his biggest fan. Sarah was thrilled to see her mother's change of heart. She had always known that Aquarius was special, and now her mother could see it too, but not everyone was happy about Aquarius's newfound acceptance. Emily, Sarah's sister, had always been wary of Aquarius's intentions. She didn't trust him, and she didn't think he was good enough for Sarah. As it happened, Emily had just gotten engaged to her boyfriend, Jack. They were planning a small, intimate wedding, and Emily was excited to start her new life with the man she loved. But when Emily and Jack came over to visit Sarah and Mrs. Johnson, they were met with mockery and disdain. Sarah and her mother laughed at Emily's engagement ring, calling it tacky and cheap. They also made fun of Jack, calling him poor and unambitious. Emily was devastated by their cruel words, and she felt like they were trying to ruin her happiness, but Aquarius stepped in, using his powers to calm the situation. He smiled charmingly at Emily and Jack, and he congratulated them on their engagement. "Love is the most important thing in life," Aquarius said, his voice full of wisdom. "It doesn't matter how much money you have or what kind of ring you wear. What matters is the love you share with each other." Emily and Jack were touched by Aquarius's words, and they felt a sense of gratitude towards him. They realized that he wasn't just a charming and handsome man, he was also kind and wise. As the visit came to an end, Emily and Jack thanked Aquarius for his hospitality. They left feeling happy and content, despite the initial tension, but as soon as they were gone, Sarah and her mother started mocking them again. They laughed at Emily's engagement ring and made fun of Jack's job. Aquarius watched them with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. He had thought that he had made progress with Mrs. Johnson, but now he realized that she was still the same selfish and cruel person she had always been. Aquarius decided to take action immediately. "I have to act fast and teach them a big lesson," Aquarius said. As the days went by, Aquarius's anger towards Sarah and her mother grew. He was fed up with their selfish and cruel behavior, and he decided to teach them a lesson. Aquarius proposed to Sarah, but not because he loved her or wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. No, he proposed to her because he wanted to teach her and her mother a lesson. Sarah was overjoyed when Aquarius proposed to her. She had always dreamed of marrying a rich and handsome man, and now her dream was coming true, but Aquarius's intentions were far from romantic. He planned to marry Sarah and then reveal his true identity as a water god. He would show her and her mother that they were not as powerful and important as they thought they were. Meanwhile, Emily and Jack were happily married. They had a small, intimate wedding, surrounded by their closest friends and family. As they exchanged their vows, Emily and Jack couldn't help but think about how lucky they were to have found each other. They knew that their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle, and they were excited to start their new life together. Aquarius attended Emily and Jack's wedding, and he couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. I wish I'm human to find someone that will love me as Emily loved Jack. Aquarius remembered Sarah and her behavior and said, I can't wait to teach Sarah a very serious lesson. As the wedding day approached, Aquarius's anger towards Sarah and her mother grew. He was furious with them for their selfish and cruel behavior, and he couldn't wait to teach them a lesson. The wedding day finally arrived, and Aquarius and Sarah exchanged their vows in a lavish ceremony. As the wedding night approached, Aquarius's anger towards Sarah and her mother grew. He was furious with them for their selfish and cruel behavior, and he decided to take revenge. On their wedding night, Aquarius transformed into a half-human, half-fish creature. He had scales instead of skin, and his legs had turned into a tail. Sarah was horrified when she saw Aquarius's transformation. She had never seen anything like it before, and she didn't know how to react. Aquarius smiled cruelly at Sarah. Now it's time for us to consummate our marriage, he said, his voice dripping with malice. Sarah was appalled. You can't be serious, she said, trying to back away from him, but Aquarius was relentless. He grabbed Sarah and pulled her towards him, his scales scraping against her skin. Make love to me, my lovely wife, he hissed, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. Sarah was terrified. She had never been so scared in her life. She tried to struggle free, but Aquarius was too strong. You're my wife, I will never let you go, and if you try anything stupid I will take your life. Aquarius said. Just as Aquarius was about to force himself on Sarah, Emily and Jack burst into the room. They had been suspicious of Aquarius's intentions, and they had come to rescue Sarah. Leave her alone, Emily shouted, her voice firm and commanding. Aquarius turned to face Emily, his eyes flashing with anger. But Emily stood her ground, refusing to back down. You're not going to hurt my sister, Emily said, her voice steady. Aquarius snarled, but he knew he was beaten. He transformed back into his human form and stormed out of the room, leaving Sarah shaken and terrified. Sarah turned to Emily and Jack, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she sobbed. Emily and Jack hugged Sarah tightly, trying to comfort her. They knew that Sarah had been through a traumatic experience, and they were determined to help her heal. Despite the traumatic experience Sarah had just endured, Aquarius was not willing to let her go. He insisted that she rightfully belonged to him, and that he would not rest until he had claimed her as his own. But why? Sarah begged, tears streaming down her face. I don't love you, and I never will. Please, just leave me alone. Aquarius's expression was cold and unyielding. You belong to me, he repeated, his voice dripping with malice. And I will not be denied. You and your mother have treated me with contempt and disrespect, and now it's time for you to pay the price. Sarah's eyes widened in horror as she realized the true extent of Aquarius's intentions. He didn't want her because he loved her, but because he wanted to punish her and her mother for their cruel and selfish behavior. No, please, Sarah begged, but Aquarius was unmoved. As the days passed, Sarah became increasingly desperate. She knew that she had to escape from Aquarius's clutches, but she had no idea how. Emily and Jack did their best to support Sarah, but even they were powerless against Aquarius's magic. It seemed as though nothing could stop him from claiming Sarah as his own. As the tension built, Sarah's mother began to realize the gravity of her mistakes. She had always taught Sarah to be selfish and cruel, but now she saw the devastating consequences of those actions. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," her mother wept. But Sarah just turned away. "It's too late for apologies," Sarah said, her voice cold and hard. "You should have thought of that before you taught me to be like you." As the standoff between Aquarius and Sarah continued, it seemed as though the fate of Sarah's soul hung in the balance. Would she be able to escape the clutches of the vengeful water god, or would she be trapped forever, forced to pay the price for her mother's mistakes? As the days passed, Aquarius continued to appear to Sarah, his presence always accompanied by an unsettling sense of dread. He would whisper strange and ominous things in her ear, making her feel like she was losing her mind. But despite his intimidating behavior, Aquarius began to feel a pang of pity for Sarah. He saw the fear in her eyes, and he realized that she was not beyond redemption. One day, Aquarius appeared to the entire family, his presence commanding attention. "I have come to give you a warning," he said, his voice booming. "Your selfish and cruel behavior has consequences. You have hurt many people, and now it is time for you to make amends." Sarah's mother trembled with fear. But Sarah herself looked up at Aquarius with a glimmer of hope. "How can we make things right?" she asked. Aquarius looked at her with a hint of surprise. "You can start by being kind to one another," he said. "Treat others with respect and compassion. And most importantly, learn to forgive yourselves and others." As Aquarius finished speaking, he began to fade away. "Remember, I am always watching," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I will return if you do not change your ways." With that, Aquarius disappeared, leaving the family to ponder his words. They looked at each other, and for the first time, they saw the damage they had caused. Sarah's mother began to sob, overcome with grief. "I'm so sorry," she wept. "I never meant to hurt anyone." Sarah herself looked up, a sense of determination on her face. "We can change," she said. "We can be better." And with that, the family began their journey towards redemption. They learned to be kind to one another, and to treat others with respect and compassion. As for Aquarius, he returned to the river where he had come from, his mission accomplished. He had taught the family a valuable lesson, and he had given them a second chance.